Hello, I'm Xtina Lamb from Medway Fine Printmakers, and I'm here with Rachel Moore and Francesca Baur to talk about screen printing. All three of us are screen printers, and we teach it too. We all have different approaches though, and we use different methods to make our stencils. So I'd like to ask both of you, maybe I'll start with Rachel, just to talk a little bit about your studio and what kind of your basic sort of process methods are for screen printing.
Yeah, so my studio probably isn't your typical kind of workshop studio for screen printing. It's part of the Nucleus building in Rochester High Street, and it's an Edwardian building. So it's grade 2 listed, I believe. So they've got to be really careful about what they can and can't do with structurally. So it's got beautiful parquet flooring, which we have to make sure it's protected. So again, not your typical kind of screen printing studio. I use it mainly for workshops. That's what I do rather than doing my own kind of work. Yeah. But also because it is a public building as well, we always like to have the door open if we're in. That's sort of our philosophy really. If the door's open, if we're in, then the door's open. So come in and sort of have a look around the studio, have a chat, that sort of thing. Because I teach it, I quite like to start with just a basic level if people sort of don't know screen printing at all. So I use paper stencils, that's it mainly, and then I also run 2-day course where they can come and set up a screen using the blocking and the filler, and then they can do sort of repeat patterns from that. I do that.
Yeah, so screen printing is quite a flexible print medium in that you have this stretched frame. Like you could use the frame I see behind you there, Rachel, kind of like you've been doing some tutorials, haven't you, where you've just been stretching either picture frames or embroidery hoop type things. But so it's like a mesh across a stretched frame. That's it, lovely. And then there's different ways of blocking it. So you have paper stencils where you cut a hole in them, or you can directly paint blocker onto them and then leave gaps for you to print through, or there's various ways like that, but it's just like a hole or not a hole in that kind of mesh kind of that you've blocked it or it's not blocked.
That's it. Yeah, you've just got to remember where the open bits of the screen are, whether that's done with a blocking ink or if it's done with a paper stencil. That's the bits that are going to take the colour on your final piece.
Yeah.
So sometimes it just takes a while to get your head round what's what, and even now I sometimes stand back and kind of go, hang on, if I do that then that will happen, oh no, so I need to turn it. And because although with screen printing it's the resist print, not a relief print, so you're not doing a negative image, there's part of your brain that has to remember it's a little bit of a negative image, because the bits that you're cutting out are the bits that are going to take the ink. Because so many times people come to a workshop, so they've got a big piece of newsprint in front of them, plain newsprint. They'll cut the stencil out and they just screw up the main part. It's like, no, that's the main bit. It just takes a while to get your head around.
Yeah, I've had the same thing in home ed classes as well, kind of like where you can't have your eyes on absolutely everybody, and but then I guess they can use it as a mask rather than a stencil as well, so they can do this sort of negative thing.
And there's always masking tape. Magic masking tape covered a multitude of things.
It's interesting hearing you talking about the positive negative, Rachel, because I find that if I do a workshop at the studio, a photographic one, and people are painting the black areas, say with Indian ink, which is where they want the hole to be in the screen, they find that very difficult to get their head around, to kind of have to do like a mini exposure for people to understand how the hole's going to appear in the screen as a stencil. So it's the same kind of thing, but the other way around.
Demos are really important, aren't they? Because and even then I think you can do a demo and it's not until someone actually does it that it really sinks in.
And Francesca, do you want to talk about your studio and process a little?
So my studio sounds very different sort of setup. It is quite messy. And I kind of went back to front really with my setup of my studio. I did a crowdfunding Kickstarter quite a few years ago now, so 2014, and that was in mind that I wanted to buy a very long table, so kind of 6 meter print table, and then that would require a big exposure unit. So I kind of had these grand ideas before I actually got a space, and then lucky enough to get the money, and yeah, then I had to start looking for a studio, which was quite difficult to find a space that I could kind of afford that could fit all this great big equipment in. And yeah, eventually I came across this place in Whitstable, which is an industrial estate, and it's perfect really. It's a little bit like a container, but it's upstairs, and it's about 7 meters by 8 meters, so it just kind of fits me in with all my big equipment. So yeah, it's mainly table, so it's got a great big table in it, and then I've also got a very large exposure unit, so I do a lot of photographic screen printing, even though I do paper stencils as well, but I guess with my own work it tends to be more photographic. So yeah, which you do as well, don't you? So
absolutely, yeah. So I'm quite coveting your lovely big table. I mean, I've got a print studio, so I run Medway Fine Printmakers in Rochester, and that space is part of Intra. So Intra has various things going on there. There's like a glass studio, a craft studio, and some of the space is used for one thing one day and another thing another day. So we've got some areas where there are big presses, and you know, our exposure unit and our wash booth are always in the same place, but the printing table is like a big board, 6 foot by 4, that gets slapped on top of another table. So that's like a kind of felt and calico covered big board that gets lifted up onto it. But I would love to have a space that just had the big dedicated print table in it. But when I moved to Medway, I suddenly had a really big space that I could fit tons of things in, and I decided to set up the photographic screen printing. But I've still got all of the sort of legacy of the things I liked doing when I only had a tiny space. So I was using a funny little machine called a Print Gokko, which is kind of like it's a toy, basically, a Japanese toy that has just really good quality print to it and really good inks. And so I used to run classes in our shared studio. The Riso company is pretty much their biggest fan. I kind of I've used all of their machines, so the little tiny kind of desktop, and then they've got these big reprographics machines called Risograph, and so it's like a stencil based thing as well, and I've got one of those. So basically tried to use every machine they've produced. And one of the things that they produced in recent years was a Gokko Pro, and the Gokko Pro makes photographic style stencils. So you start with an image that you do on your computer, and then it gets translated to a stencil. Instead of going and exposing it to light, you feed this stretched frame through a machine with a digital print head. And so it's like 2 layers. You've got the mesh, and you've got a kind of heat sensitive film all over it, and the digital head just exposes the image all across it as it feeds it through. But it's amazing. You can have, like, from your image kind of like on your computer to the stencil, it takes like 2 minutes or something. And so I think that the other unique thing about your work, Francesca, is the fact that you use inks based on natural materials. Just wondered if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
yeah, so I suppose through my Kent cloth project I did last year, then that kind of gave me the opportunity to research and explore the idea of actually printing with natural dyes, because before I was using dyes, which I still do, that are approved by the soil associations. They're low toxic, and they've got the organic stamp on them, but I've always wanted to print with natural dyes, so that I kind of had a year where I could just play. But I had lots of links with different gardens, and I had space in the gardens where I could grow. And the main one was the Pines Calyx down by St Margaret's Bay, where I grew natural dyes and then processed them. And alongside doing workshops, I also produced my own work printing with the dyes. But what was interesting actually about that year is that I hardly did any workshops in my studio, whereas before that I was mainly doing the workshops in the studio, which I really love doing, but it was really nice experience going out to different locations and taking people on walks and then doing the workshops that were inspired by their walks. So that worked really well. But but yeah, so I'm still now continuing using the natural dyes, which you came and did a workshop with me, didn't you, Rachel? So it's kind of a very different process to the printing with your normal screen printing inks. I think, yeah, initially I felt slightly disappointed because it works in such a different way. It's almost like a glue you're printing through.
It's like slime,
also,
isn't it?
Yeah.
That's,
and also like
that was the only way I could describe it, is a slime. And also the first off, the colours really don't look anything.
No, so they're very muted.
Yeah.
And
but then they do
change as well. They change over time.
Exactly, yeah, as they dry and sort of cure. That word.
You steam them, so that's how they're cured. But yeah, so that's been, initially I think I was disappointed, but I think as with screen printing, there's so much troubleshooting, isn't there, that goes on. It was just a new thing to troubleshoot. And one of the things that I found quite difficult is the layering of printing. So I like the kind of layering of prints, but when you do it with natural dyes, it doesn't kind of sit on the layer so well. So I'm working in different fabrics as well. You kind of get a very different kind of look with the dye, whereas if you're using water-based dyes, then it's kind of pretty much standard. What you see in your pot's going to print slightly darker or slightly lighter, but you don't get a huge shock like you do with natural dyes. But yeah, so it's been an interesting process.
So you, for all of the materials for the natural dye process, are you buying in kind of natural dye pigment, or are you making them all yourself?
Both. So I did some that I'm buying the actual pigment and then mixing it with the binder, and some where I've actually made a dye pot and then dyed the fabric, but then reduced it to the point that it then becomes, you can dry it and then use it as a natural dye to print with. And also as a liquid, actually, if it's kind of condensed enough, if it's a small enough amount, you can then mix your paste into it and print. So yeah, it's kind of, it works well. I think as to kind of do as a sort of hobby at home, then it's slightly harder in that you have to steam the fabric to then, so that it's washed fast, which you can do with an iron. So that's kind of possible, but I guess it depends what sort of scale you're doing it at home. So yeah, one of the things that I did purchase last year for the studio was a bullet steamer. So that's great because I can then print large pieces of fabric and roll it up and steam them once they're printed.
Do you both, well, I know you do, Christina, do other different types of printmaking. Do you do other different types of printmaking, Francesca?
Lino printing for myself, but
do you often get asked, both of you, what's your favourite print technique by students? Or
I guess I don't, because I guess I'm mainly sort of gone down the screen printing route, but I kind of
they just assume.
Yeah, I guess I use the other printmaking techniques in the build up to exposing on a screen. So I do printmaking and then expose the prints onto the screen.
Yeah, I think with me, because we use other tutors as well, so I'm not teaching all of the techniques, but I can do all of them. And so when we've got our open access sessions, I'm supporting people on the range of printmaking techniques, all of which I've done, but kind of there's only certain ones that I'm really think of them as being my thing. So stencil stuff to do with mono printing and screen printing, but then I also love dry point. So the things that I love and do often are the things I'm happy teaching. Although I could teach lino cut, I'm far happier bringing in Nick Morley, who sort of lives and breathes lino cut. And
lino cuts. I've got one of his on my wall.
It's great because sometimes when you try something out yourself, you think, oh yeah, this will work in a workshop, and then you throw it out to people and they find so many different ways of kind of messing with that process, especially children. So it's kind of it's really good for working out what can go wrong, or just interesting stuff. Actually, I learn loads from them in the way that they approach it and how they come up with little shortcuts and stuff. Sometimes it's great.
Yeah, that's true. Got a lovely set of squeegees and been screen printing for, I don't know, 25 years or something like that. And it wasn't until someone came and did a workshop and then put on its base, and I didn't realise that you could actually use the squeegee as to stand up. So that time of kind of propping it up. And
yeah, I always say I always learn something from my students all the time. It might just be they phrase something so much better than you have, or yeah, like you say, they come up with some shortcut and you're like, why didn't I think of that? Oh, I never come across that before. The first squeegee that I ever bought it's it's wooden and it's stained and it's used and it's worn, and yeah, definitely that's my favourite, I think. Yeah. What about you, Francesca?
The squeegee, but also I think I've kind of grown very fond of my washout booth with all the splatterings of paint in it. It's kind of
You're just showing off now because I haven't got one of those.
And the other thing actually I get quite a lot of pleasure out is the backing cloth on the table, like when you do workshops, it's the stains that build up and you kind of, it's almost like a story, isn't it? Of some of it's my own work, but then there's also the Saturday workshops where people will leave their print behind.
Do you ever do anything with those? Because I can't bear to throw them away. I've got quite a few of them.
I still use them all, but people do sell them, don't they?
Do they?
But yeah, people cut them up and do. Seen people selling them.
Yeah, it's nice. It just reminds me of all the people that have been there.
Yeah.
So Rachel, you've been kind of looking at developing some online courses as well, sort of like as a sort of way forward. How's that been going? How are you feeling about that now?
Yeah, it's something that I don't necessarily want to do, because I do enjoy one-to-one, people actually being in the room, you're face to face, that sort of thing. But I think it's something that I need to do, just because moving forward with social distancing, I'm not going to be able to have that many people in for a workshop, and they're going to have to do a few health and safety tweaks. So it either means that I've got to charge more, or I've got to do more of them. And I'm thinking online, it also means that I'm not just restricted to areas, whereas before, I think the furthest I've had is sort of someone come from East Sussex to Rochester for one of my workshops. But online, you're international, aren't you, really? So it does make your audience a lot bigger, which is quite a nice thing. But yeah, we're going to see. We'll see how they go. So yeah, it's been interesting doing the practices, but I've now set up 2 online ones. I've got a lino cut one happening during Medway Print Festival on the 18th of June, and I've also got. Sorry.
Well done.
Thank you. And I've also got a sunprint one. So that's a bit more fun actually, because it would be like a Facebook Live. People get the sunprint sent to them, and then now that some of the regulations have lifted, even families can sort of join up and maybe do it in gardens or in parks, rather than just individuals or just a household doing it on their own.
What do you think the screen printing offers as a process that others don't?
Oh, that's a very good question.
I think kind of having that kind of flatness to your kind of image that you can never get, even if you sort of try doing sort of like stencil prints and sponging through, that's always going to be an uneven. So I think what I like about it is that kind of block that you get with an even coating, which maybe that's why initially the kind of natural dye thing I found difficult, because you do get a much thicker layer because of the binder you're using. It's a bit like wallpaper paste, so you kind of get more, and then when you lift off the screen it's got more danger of kind of picking it back up again. So yeah, I guess that's what I like about screen printing with kind of water-based dyes, is you kind of have got that even coating.
Yeah, I think that for me there's a really nice balance between control and freedom. You can draw something really intricately, like really carefully, and have something really precise, or you can do like a really free kind of splashy drawing, and that would also kind of like the painting, but also if you're doing it with Indian ink or something, translate really well, and then you can either use very flat or very controlled gradients in it, or you can just like do a monoprint through the screen and go kind of, so it's got lots of levels of expression that you can put into it, but it's also something you can really control as well, so it's got quite
a lot as well though, because you can easily have a mistake, can't you, with screen printing? And I think it's quite nice that once you kind of learn that you can always sort of change it in some way to hide the mistake or enhance the mistake. I quite like that about it, that there's kind of the problem solving.
I love it when you take someone through that process of you know, when they don't know anything about it to begin with, and then by the end of the day that they've learnt that process and they could come and do it again and they've got something they're really happy with. It's just joyous. I really love it.
Yeah, you get a real high from it, don't you?
Yeah.
Get a real buzz. I think as well with screen printing, it's the whole manual process. It's, you know, you're lifting things up, you're placing them down, you're taking hold of the squeegee and you're pulling it towards you, and then, you know, you lift to reveal the print. And I think there's always a bit of magic in that, because it's like that moment when you lift the screen for the big reveal. And I think you probably found this, Xtina, working with children, especially with screen prints, that just wow, especially when you do a demonstration, for example, in front of the class, and you lift the screen and the audible wow is it's just like that's just why I keep teaching it. I think
one of the Thermofax screens I've got has got wow on it, because that is what they said so often, and so I had to, sometimes I make up the Thermofax screens for workshops that are on a theme. So I did like one that was all on like pop art for Christie's one time, and so I did, one of them was like, you know, sort of like zigzaggy kind of like thing with like wow in the middle, or sort of like things with half tones. And so I love giving that to people and they go wow, and then they realise it says wow, and then that makes them laugh.
Double wow.
Yeah, that never gets boring. Never.
What we print?
We haven't really talked about what we actually print onto.
Yeah, go for it.
I guess for me it's kind of natural. I talked about natural plants, but printing onto mainly natural fibres, and linen has been a big one. And then alongside the natural dye garden, I did actually grow some flax last year just to see that process, and that was really interesting as well, doing that with people in workshops and them understanding where their actual fabric comes from this plant. That was great to see it from seed through to cloth.
I found that fascinating when I came on the workshop that you did at Rochester Art Gallery. The whole process was really good, and it was interesting as well being on the other side of the table. Really.
People put their heart and soul into it all day, don't they? So and then when they walk away with something that's actually printed, it's lovely. Are you both doing workshops during the festival?
Yeah, so we've both been recording video tutorials. So mine have been well, they're both of them around theme of kind of stuff you can do like with things from your kitchen mainly, but so mine have been etching with Tetra Paks and pasta machine, and relief printing with cereal packets, which I do a lot anyway. And then the last one was kitchen litho, which I love now. I mean, I've done it before and had sort of fairly erratic results, but I've managed to work out now that simple is best. You have all of these like advice online of like sand your tin foil and kind of use vinegar and all these things, and the easiest way is just to unroll your tin foil, not touch it, draw with a China graph pencil, pour a load of Coca-Cola over it,
really
down with oil, and then you can ink it up. It's just magic, and
fantastic.
The result is really, you know.
I look forward to watching your workshops.
People like Eric Revilius and that, who used that stone litho a lot. It makes me salivate looking at their work. It's just kind of like I feel like I want to eat it. Kind of things that are, really excite me visually, and I know that I probably don't want to go the route of learning stone litho, just because I've got too many other processes I like. But this is so fast, and you can get a decent quality kind of print from it. So fun, very highly recommended.
What were your workshops, Rachel?
So I'm doing the screen printing using embroidery hoop and just a kind of a credit card or store card or something. Squeegee. That's one of them, and then the other one is using use corn flour, PVA glue, and white vinegar. Mix them all up, heat them, and it makes a really great kind of clay, like air dry clay. And then it's just imprinting leaves into that, letting it dry, and then just using a colour wash to bring out all the, so they're kind of imprints, I think. Yeah, so that's how I kind of shoehorned that one into Medway Print Festival. Because I always find Medway Print Festival's really good for doing lots of taster sessions, so almost like you use sometimes your homemade groups, Christine, as guinea pigs, because it's great. I can just do some cheap little taster sessions, just see what I'm, yeah, that's it, see if it works out. And I had so many lined up for this year, and obviously with coronavirus they had to be cut down to, yeah, so I've sort of improvised a bit of what I'm doing and putting it online. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's been
it's been lovely. So we've all sort of encountered each other many times before, but it's just been really lovely to bring you together. And yeah, I hope that we get to do more things like this together in the future. And good luck with the rest of this strange year. And,
workshops back in our studios one day.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of the print festival as well.